Hey everybody, it is Taylor of Summer Del Sol here, hopping right into the process to get the chassis attached to the power plant frame. I'm really excited to show you how to do this, and it's the first step in making it look like a real driving car. Woo! In the previous video, you saw how I disconnected the suspension from the tub of the car. We lifted that off. Right now I'm just clearing out those springs so I can get down to the bottom of the suspension here a little bit more easily. With that spring out of the way, now you can take your handy 17 and start to remove this from the lower control arm. It can be a little tough to get started, but you can use some leverage from your cheater bar here. In retrospect, I might be putting some unnecessary pressure on the hubs and joints here by not having the subframe propped up, so keep that in mind. With that bolt out, you can now pull out the suspension. With this suspension component out, you can really see how the last 30 years have affected this car. I was riding on some busted shocks. You can see that this hydraulic doesn't even come up. It's just kind of chilling. Maybe a little bit of increase, but not much. Time to get the rest out and prepare it for that chassis. Now I do hope you have a little bit of a head start here. This next step requires bribing a very cute boy with 3.5 years of love and affection in order to help you build your car. That said, the neighbor who's offered a helping hand 5 minutes ago also doesn't hurt. Once you get the chassis up and over the engine, you want to make sure you're not going to drop this on any line or any wiring that could get damaged in the process. It's okay if you don't get the bolt holes directly above each other. They're going to have to be played with a little bit with ratchet straps, especially if your donor vehicle has been in an accident. Sometimes those subframes can be a little bit finicky, but you can definitely work that out with some ratchet straps and a little creativity, as we'll show shortly. Once you place that down and feel comfortable where it's positioned, give it a quick once over. You want to make sure nothing's been pinched, like those wires or lines that I mentioned earlier, and then really take a moment to soak it all in.
Awesome! Oh my god!
It's a cool project.
Crazy! Thank you. I appreciate your help.
It's amazing how neat that fits together.
Right? Isn't that wild? Legos. Thank you so much.
It's really coming together.
Oh my god! What?
The most helpful of boys in all of this space from my mom's car. The top two bolts in the front subframe connect to the upper control arm. You'll have another one here in that circular area and then the one immediately behind it. The tail end will have 4 connecting directly to the rear subframe. The front subframe hardware comes with 6 short bolts and 2 longer ones. They'll attach up front, and the rear subframe bolts will come with 4 long bolts that go in the back. For the front subframe, the first 3 that are closest to the front of the engine are going to utilize the shorter bolt that come in the front subframe pack, and the one that's a little bit longer is going to be going to the 4th one, farthest from the back. It's going to go into the actual floor and down below. Now when you're putting all of these bolts in, you're actually going to want to keep them top side up just in case that nut falls off on the bottom. You're not actually going to lose an entire bolt if it somehow gets loose. And here begins the fun saga of trying to get this chassis in line with the bolts that I need by wiggling. Yeah, it's got some interesting results. So once you finally get any bolts in place, you want to get the nut on there just kind of loosely. You'll notice it's hard to kind of screw past more than a certain amount without a wrench anyway, but we want to keep these loose so we can have a little bit of flexibility in how we can rotate the chassis as needed. I've got to say, if you've got a straight subframe, these are pretty easy to drop in. I only had a problem with the very last bolt in the back here, but these really just kind of cooperated for once. Once you have a few bolts in on each side, you're definitely going to have to bust out the ratchet strap. For the bolt I'm trying to fit, I'm trying to bring the subframe up closer to the chassis because I don't have it propped up where the back end kicks up enough, so I'm going to be ratcheting that together. The goal is to bring that tab up to the frame so I can put that slightly longer bolt that goes up front right in there. Once you get it close enough, loosely set it in place and add the nut below. If you're like me and you have cheap ratchet straps, be careful releasing that. That pinched me definitely a few times. Thankfully this eyelet lined up pretty well with the subframe, so I was able to drop this bolt in too. Also, if you think I'm going to trim the clip where my arm looks this toned, you are sorely mistaken. Dang! So at this point I have a few of the bolts on the other side set up. You can see where this one's clearly cross-threaded. On that note, I highly recommend checking out their channel. They've built an Exocet as well. They also have an awesome podcast. Check it out. But on that note, we're going to start playing with a little bit of height variances. What you just saw was me raising the subframe to the chassis, so we've got kind of a little bit of play here. It's allowing me to move things around where the ratchet straps just weren't quite cutting it. On this note, I'm not an expert. This, in my mind, could potentially damage threads, but I seem to have gotten away with it. Your mileage may vary. On the opposite side, I ended up dropping the subframe to release the spot for the final frustrating bolt. Thankfully, the rear subframe bolts do still just drop right in, and it's easy peasy. Just to attach that nut at the bottom and you're good to go. Except for the last bolt. It's always the last bolt. Why do they always give you such a hard time? It's like, come on! So here's where I had to get a little more creative and combine my two strategies from earlier. At this point, I knew I needed to bring the subframe up and to the left a little bit, so I ratcheted this diagonally, hoping that this would bring it toward that and a little bit over, and then still didn't have quite enough play there, so the back end had to be raised just a touch.
Come on. So close. Yes. Woo! Ratchet straps, y'all.
Now that you have everything in place, you're going to want to come through and make sure everything is snug before you come back later to torque. First, you're going to want to rotate several times to see who's calling your name, only to find there's no one there. I'm going crazy. Now remove your stuck tool and enjoy your dirt tan because you will never have melanin, you saltine.
Oh. Oh my gosh. If my math is right, I think that was 12 bolts. Covered in dirt. I'm exhausted. Had to get creative. You definitely want to utilize ratchet straps. Whew. Raising and lowering the frame against the subframe kind of helped me drop those bolts in. Can't honestly recommend it. There's a chance you could damage those threads, maybe. I'm not sure. That's how I did it. I think I got away with it. Everything's snug and didn't have any issues. But I'm very tired. Whew. But very excited. Thanks as always for watching. I will catch you next time. Shout out to Miss Becky. Say it house mom. It's been a minute. Whew.